Welcome back, seekers of history's darkest corners. Deep in the North Carolina mountains, hidden from the world by steep ridges and dense forests, there exists a property that seems to resist time itself. It was the home of the Holloways, a family whose lives were far more complex than the isolated homestead suggests. To any outsider, they appeared as quiet farmers, disconnected from the world. But beneath the surface, there were letters, documents, and a diary that would later reveal a life filled with secrets, obligations, and unanswered questions. The estate was imposing, though now all that remains are moss-covered foundations and tangled fields swallowed by wilderness. Once carefully maintained, the land tells the story of a family that lived apart from neighbors, deliberately cutting themselves off from ordinary society. But even in isolation, their past refused to stay hidden. Records suggest that the Holloway patriarch had dealings far beyond the mountains, possible investments in Baltimore, lumber, and railroads. Yet tracing these transactions proved nearly impossible. Many records were lost or destroyed, leaving only hints of financial complexity. The diary offers a window into the Holloways' daily life, capturing both ordinary moments and unusual occurrences. Lights that flickered in the night, unexplained sounds, and visitors who arrived and departed at dusk hint at a life more intricate than the outward isolation suggested. The writing itself reflects a mind at once analytical and burdened, chronicling struggles, moral dilemmas, and a growing sense of unease. It is clear the family was coping with pressures that extended beyond the visible world, pressures of inheritance, financial obligations, and perhaps the shadow of past events that forced them into retreat. Local lore whispered of the family's strange routines. Neighbors spoke of glimpses of lights, of rhythms and murmurs carried across the forest, of a household that remained deliberately separate. The Holloways' retreat may have been a form of self-preservation, a shield against forces both real and imagined. Yet the very presence of letters left unopened and documents preserved in hidden caches suggests that someone, somewhere, maintained a connection to a world the family sought to leave behind. Their disappearance, in the spring of 1900, would mark the culmination of years of mounting tension. The diary's last pages hint at foreknowledge, an awareness that their lives were about to change irrevocably. Everything the Holloways left behind, from furniture to carefully laid table settings, suggests a sudden departure, executed with deliberate precision, leaving the estate as a frozen testament to unresolved mysteries. Before we continue with the story and uncover the unspeakable secrets that lie ahead, I must ask something important. This channel is not for everyone. Only the bravest souls, willing to confront history's shadowed corners, should proceed. If you've made it this far, you are not like most people. You understand that some truths are too haunting to ignore. So hit that subscribe button and join our community of true mystery seekers. Tell me in the comments, what state are you watching from? Are you brave enough to hear a story like this from your own backyard? Next, we will explore the Holloways' hidden past, letters never opened, mysterious visitors, and the web of connections that hint at a life far more complicated than the mountains allowed. The story of the Holloways deepens when previously unknown letters surfaced decades later, tucked away in forgotten archives. These letters, some yellowed with age and others surprisingly intact, suggested that the family's isolated life in North Carolina was far from detached. Each envelope carried traces of a broader world, names, addresses, and hints of obligations that reached beyond the mountains. They pointed to business dealings in Baltimore and a network of acquaintances that contradicted the image of a family cut off from society. Investigators attempting to track the patriarch's financial history quickly realized the enormity of the task. Baltimore at the turn of the century was a hub of commerce, with thousands of businesses and countless records, many of which were lost over time. Some surviving documents mentioned railroads and timber investments. Others suggested that the family might have operated under alternate names, a common practice for those wishing to separate private life from commercial endeavors. No matter the route, the Holloways' past was tangled, and their presence in North Carolina seemed only a temporary refuge from previous entanglements. The letters raised questions more unsettling than their content. Why had so many gone unopened for years? Had the family deliberately ignored them, or had circumstances prevented delivery? The survival of these letters, however, suggested intent. Someone had preserved them, a silent witness to the family's connections and secrets. The very act of leaving them untouched hinted at caution, perhaps even fear of revelation. The diary adds further texture to the mystery. Entries reveal a family acutely aware of their pasts, their writing alternating between ordinary domestic matters and moments of sharp observation about visitors and unusual occurrences on the property. There are cryptic references to people, arriving at dusk, strange lights in the forest, and noises that defied explanation. These observations indicate that the Holloway's isolation was carefully curated. They were not merely hiding from neighbors, but managing interactions, deciding whom to allow into their sphere. By the early 1980s, the Holloway property had become a subject of renewed interest. An independent filmmaker attempted to reconstruct their story, traveling to North Carolina, filming the estate's remnants, and interviewing local historians. Yet the project faltered under a cloud of inexplicable difficulties. Equipment failures, resignations of crew members, and a pervasive unease that made continued work nearly impossible. The unfinished film, like the letters themselves, became another artifact hinting at a persistent force of mystery surrounding the Holloways. Even as technology advanced, uncovering the truth remained elusive. In the 1990s, amateur genealogists employed digitized databases to trace census records and tax documents. They confirmed the family's presence in North Carolina through the 1880s and 1890s, yet inconsistencies appeared. People vanishing from records, property abandoned without explanation, taxes unpaid. The final census entries coincided eerily with the diary's last page, as though the document itself anticipated the family's sudden disappearance. The Holloways were no simple mountain family. They were individuals with histories, debts, connections, and perhaps dangers they sought to escape. Their story is a testament to how the past refuses to remain buried, even in the most remote corners of the world. Next, we will examine the diary's revelations in greater depth. Psychological markers of stress, the strange fluidity of the household, and the abrupt final departure that would leave generations of questions in its wake. The Holloway Diary is more than a chronicle of events. It is a window into a mind under siege. Each page pulses with tension, revealing the family's growing anxiety and the subtle erosion of stability. Linguistic patterns hint at stress and emotional strain. Sentences that oscillate between precise observation and moments of detachment, as if the author were trying to step outside reality to survive it. Words like darkness, silence, and heaviness appear with increasing frequency, while references to hope and future diminish almost to extinction. It is a textual mapping of despair, capturing the tightening grip of psychological pressure on a family isolated from community support. Census and tax records corroborate the diary's timeline, yet they reveal an unsettling fluidity in the household. Names appear and vanish without explanation. Family composition shifts from one record to the next. In 1900, the property was suddenly abandoned, taxes unpaid, and authorities found no heirs or guardians. The diary's final entry coincides with this exact moment of disappearance, suggesting that the Holloways had foreseen their departure. Nothing about it seems accidental. It was abrupt, deliberate, and meticulously timed, as though the patriarch had orchestrated every detail to erase the family from conventional records. Beyond the administrative traces, small domestic details amplify the sense of unease. Contemporary reports describe a kitchen left ready for a meal, dishes clean, and a table set, ordinary signs of life, frozen in the moment of departure. These remnants suggest the abandonment was sudden, yet not chaotic. Someone consciously maintained appearances, perhaps to create a veil of normalcy. What urgency forced such a departure? A threat? A final decision? Or simply the culmination of mounting pressures that had finally become unbearable? A later psychological analysis provides a humanizing lens on these events. A graduate student studying the diary noted patterns consistent with trauma and dissociation. The detached narration, the precise observations amidst evident distress, point to a mind simultaneously burdened and alert, someone acutely aware of danger, social scrutiny, or moral obligations yet struggling to maintain control. Yet within this tension lies clarity. Passages reveal analytical thinking and logical reasoning, demonstrating that the author, while suffering, retained a sophisticated grasp of their environment and choices. At the same time, traces of the Holloways' wider connections emerge. Letters from Baltimore, mentions of inheritance disputes, and references to business dealings hint at reasons for isolation beyond mere solitude. Perhaps the family feared exposure of financial dealings, unresolved legal obligations, or even social scandal. These external pressures, when combined with internal strain, paint a portrait of a family cornered by circumstance, compelled toward extreme measures. The diary, the tax records, and the empty house together form a haunting triad. Evidence of a life meticulously managed, a household aware of its fragility, and a family ultimately opting for disappearance over confrontation. The patterns, linguistic, bureaucratic, and domestic, converge to tell a story of preparation, tension, and finality. Next, we will follow the Holloways' possible paths after their disappearance. Investigations into travel records, speculative escapes, and hints of South American destinations that may finally explain the centuries-old mystery. The Holloways' abrupt disappearance left a void that stretched far beyond the physical space of their home. Local records capture an abandoned estate, unpaid taxes, and household items left almost as if the family had vanished mid-meal. Yet no trace appeared in the surrounding towns. Investigators turned to transportation records, hoping to find a breadcrumb trail, stagecoach logs, train manifests, even ferry records. Despite thorough searches, the surname Holloway was absent. It was as though the family had vanished into thin air. But absence does not always mean impossibility. It suggested deliberate planning, a calculated attempt to leave behind not just a home, but an entire past. The theory of escape gained momentum with the discovery of a ship's manifest dated April 1900, found decades later in the Baltimore archives. Among passengers traveling to South America were 3 names resembling the Holloway family members. Ages roughly aligned with known records, but the names had subtle alterations. Could these be the same people who left North Carolina? While circumstantial, the evidence suggested a long-planned migration, one that would ensure anonymity far from creditors, inquisitive neighbors, and lingering legal entanglements. Yet the journey was far from simple. South America in the early 20th century was distant, dangerous, and expensive. Whoever orchestrated it must have had access to resources that were otherwise invisible in local records. Speculation turned toward hidden wealth. Discreet sales of heirlooms, secreted business profits, or inherited assets that could fund an escape. Letters from Baltimore hinted at ongoing financial dealings, suggesting that the Holloways had more than met the eye. If they carried valuables, it could explain why their departure was so meticulously timed, safely transferring assets, erasing traces, and ensuring the family's survival under new identities. Every detail in the diary now seemed like a blueprint: preparation, execution, and final closure. Yet questions lingered. Why South America? The continent offered anonymity, but also significant risk. It was an extreme solution for debt or legal complications, hinting that the pressures faced by the Holloways were profound. Was this fear rooted in financial ruin alone? Or was there something more? A past indiscretion, a hidden scandal, or perhaps a lingering threat that made local refuge impossible? Scholars debated whether the diary contained allegorical warnings, mental strain magnified by isolation, or references to real danger compelling the family to flee so far. Physical evidence, though sparse, reinforced the notion of deliberate departure. A kitchen left prepared for a meal, furniture untouched, and personal items in place suggested the household had not been abandoned in panic. Instead, it resembled a meticulously staged exit, designed to maintain appearances until the last possible moment. The family's choice to leave everything behind might indicate that secrecy was paramount, leaving no clues for neighbors or officials, avoiding questions, and preserving the integrity of their new life. Though travel records remain inconclusive, the ship manifest offers tantalizing hope that the Holloways survived beyond the mountains of North Carolina. Whether they integrated into a foreign land, lived under assumed identities, or eventually perished in obscurity remains unknown. What is undeniable is the sophistication of their disappearance. A family not merely fleeing, but disappearing with intent, foresight, and the precision of someone accustomed to managing risk and expectation. Next, we will explore the psychological and social dimensions of the Holloways' choices, the pressures of isolation, the diary's insight into mental states, and how the weight of expectation may have influenced their final, irrevocable decisions. The Holloway diary, once merely a chronicle of daily life in seclusion, reveals a far deeper narrative when examined through a psychological lens. In its fragile pages, one can trace the gradual unraveling of the author's inner world. Words related to darkness, isolation, and obligation appear with increasing frequency, while expressions of hope and future planning diminish almost entirely. This linguistic pattern mirrors the narrowing of thought and the psychological weight that had settled over the family like an invisible fog. It was not just isolation from neighbors, it was a self-imposed exile from the world, compounded by fear, guilt, and unspoken burdens. A graduate student in psychology, analyzing the diary decades later, noted moments where the author seemed almost dissociated, describing events as an outside observer. This was not hysteria or simple melodrama. Instead, it reflected a mind protecting itself, creating a buffer against the oppressive reality of daily life. Tasks were documented with precision, observations noted meticulously, but beneath the surface ran a current of tension, anxiety, and profound apprehension. The family's meticulous routines, the care in maintaining the home even while preparing to vanish, suggested a desperate attempt to retain control when control was slipping away. But the diary also contains flashes of remarkable clarity. Observations about visitors, the state of the property, and even financial matters were recorded with a critical, almost analytical perspective. These were not the ramblings of someone lost entirely to fear. The author was fully aware of the stakes and the encroaching pressure, grappling with practical, social, and emotional dilemmas simultaneously. This duality, distress mixed with acute awareness, creates a tension that resonates with anyone who has faced overwhelming circumstances yet tried to maintain composure. Isolation amplifies perception, and in the Holloway's case, it seems to have shaped interpretations of both external and internal events. Mentions of mysterious sounds, nocturnal lights, and unexplained presences could reflect heightened awareness and anxiety rather than literal supernatural phenomena. The psychological strain of solitude, combined with the knowledge of past obligations, debts, and potential legal repercussions, may have produced a lens through which ordinary events were perceived as threatening or extraordinary. This lens of stress and vigilance would have shaped decision-making. If departure was planned, it was likely influenced not only by practical necessity, but also by a heightened sense of vulnerability and anticipation of danger. Every choice, what to pack, what to leave behind, when to vanish, was filtered through this intense psychological pressure. The diary becomes a guide not only to the physical movements of the family, but also to the internal calculus of fear, responsibility, and survival. Ultimately, the diary offers a portrait of a family under siege, not by external forces alone, but by the cumulative weight of isolation, societal expectation, and personal anxiety. The Holloways were navigating the treacherous intersection of survival and morality, all while preserving an outward appearance of calm. Their eventual disappearance, abrupt and meticulously executed, emerges as the culmination of these pressures, a final act of agency in a world that had steadily tightened around them. Next, we will delve into the mysterious letters, their unopened fate, and what they reveal about connections, secrets, and the forces, mundane or otherwise, that seem to shape the Holloways' lives. The discovery of the Holloway letters decades after the family vanished added another layer of mystery to an already enigmatic story. 3 carefully preserved envelopes, yellowed with age but intact, contained messages from friends, distant relatives, and potential business contacts. They were never opened, and yet their mere existence suggested connections beyond the isolated farm in North Carolina. Whoever had saved these letters, whether a neighbor, a postmaster, or a later collector of documents, seemed to recognize their importance, even if the intended recipients had never known of them. Investigators faced a monumental task, attempting to trace the correspondence. Baltimore business records hinted at transactions involving railroads, lumber, and other ventures, but nothing definitively tied the Holloways to these enterprises. It was possible that the patriarch had operated under a different name, a not uncommon practice for those wishing to separate private life from public dealings. Regardless, the letters reinforced the notion that the Holloways were not hermits by accident. They had a history, obligations, and networks that reached far beyond the mountains they inhabited. What drew particular attention was the timing and fate of the correspondence. The letters, some dated months before the diary's final entries, were never received by the family. Had they intentionally ignored them, sensing that they could not respond without exposing secrets? Or were they simply away, already preparing for the departure that would erase their presence from public record? The ambiguity fueled speculation. Each unanswered note became a symbol of the larger question. What truths had the Holloways carried with them, and what did they leave behind deliberately? The letters also provided tantalizing hints of desperation and opportunity. One came from a woman in Charleston. Tide turned. "Oh, family inheritance matters in Virginia." Another suggested a potential partnership in Baltimore business ventures, while the third was more cryptic, hinting at matters that could neither be fully documented nor openly discussed. Scholars speculated on the nature of these messages: unfinished business, warnings, entreaties, or merely mundane communications now shrouded in mystery by the family's sudden disappearance. Even attempts to reconstruct these correspondences visually proved difficult. In 1982, a filmmaker tried to create a documentary tracing the letters' stories and the Holloways' lives, but production was plagued by technical failures, crew resignations, and an unsettling sense of unease. Though mundane explanations like faulty equipment and logistical challenges are plausible, the persistence of obstacles created a mythos around the letters, a narrative in which the past itself seemed resistant to revelation. Beyond practical concerns, the letters underscore the human aspect of the Holloways' story. They remind us that these were people embedded in networks of trust, expectation, and communication, even while they isolated themselves physically. Each envelope, sealed and unread, symbolizes a bridge never crossed, connections never realized, and choices, whether of fear, pride, or necessity, that led to permanent disappearance. The letters whispered of lives intertwined with others, yet ultimately severed by circumstance, strategy, or perhaps a deeper compulsion to vanish entirely. Next, we will explore the disappearance itself, the precise timing, the abandoned property, and the eerie synchronicity that made the Holloways vanish without a trace in the spring of 1900. Spring of 1900 marked the final chapter of the Holloways' presence in North Carolina, but the circumstances surrounding their disappearance remain baffling. Census records, tax documents, and local archives reveal a strange precision. The family's presence on the estate abruptly ended exactly when the diary concluded. In earlier decades, such fluidity in family movement might be expected, but here the synchronicity was uncanny. By 1900, tax payments ceased. Attempts by county officials to contact heirs or collect arrears proved futile. The Holloways had left, leaving behind a home intact, furniture in place, and even a kitchen table set for a meal that would never be eaten. The abruptness of their departure suggested planning, yet the details defied conventional reasoning. Valuable possessions remained untouched, from family heirlooms to everyday items. This wasn't a hurried flight spurred by sudden danger, nor was it a temporary trip that ended in tragedy. The absence had permanence written into it. Perhaps they took what they could hide quickly and left the rest to create an illusion of normalcy. Or perhaps, as some speculated, the untouched items were deliberate, a silent message to any who might follow. They had left on their own terms, and the estate now belonged to memory and myth. Local narratives and oral histories provide hints, though unverifiable. Descendants of neighboring families recalled unusual activity in the days leading to the disappearance. Visitors arriving at dusk, the sound of carts and horses, and a sense of purposeful preparation. It was as if the Holloways were orchestrating an exit that required coordination beyond the household. Within days, the property fell silent. Birds behaved erratically, forest animals stirred uneasily, and smoke was observed rising from the estate, thicker and darker than ordinary chimney fires. These reports, passed down orally, portray a final crescendo of human and natural energy before the family vanished completely. Modern researchers note the eerie consistency between the diary's tone and the archival record. Linguistic analyses indicate a steady progression of despair and urgency in the text, culminating in the final entries coinciding with the date of abandonment. The psychological toll of isolation, compounded by external pressures such as financial uncertainty and legal complications, likely played a role in the timing. The diary author seemed aware that something decisive was imminent, marking the final pages not merely as a personal record, but as a chronicle of an impending rupture from all conventional life. The estate itself became a ghostly testament to the Holloways' departure. When authorities examined the property, they found everything in place, except for the family. Beds remained unmade, dishes clean, and the well, later rediscovered, stood as a silent witness to secrets unknown. Some theorists speculate that the family may have destroyed certain documents or materials in the smoke observed before their disappearance, a protective measure ensuring that their affairs remained hidden from prying eyes. Others argue that the suddenness reflects the cumulative weight of psychological, financial, and social pressures reaching a tipping point. Ultimately, the Holloways' disappearance is a rare convergence of human planning, environmental observation, and historical record. The precision of their vanishing, paired with lingering mysteries like the letters and oral testimonies, transforms their story from a simple relocation to an enduring enigma. Their exit from North Carolina wasn't just physical, it was symbolic, leaving behind an estate frozen in time and a diary that continues to chronicle human vulnerability. Next, we will examine the attempts of later generate Irons to trace the Holloways' fate using genealogical research, shipping records, and the tantalizing possibility of a South American escape. By the late 20th century, the Holloways' disappearance had transcended local legend, attracting the curiosity of amateur genealogists and historians determined to trace their final movements. With the advent of digitized census records, tax archives, and shipping manifests, new investigative avenues opened, revealing tantalizing yet inconclusive evidence. One of the most provocative discoveries came from ports in Baltimore. A ship's manifest dated April 1900 listed several passengers whose names bore striking, if imperfect, resemblance to the Holloways. Ages and family groupings roughly matched, hinting at the possibility that the family had boarded the vessel under slightly altered identities. If this connection was accurate, it suggested a deliberate plan. The Holloways may have fled North America entirely, seeking refuge and anonymity in South America. Such a journey would not have been simple. Transatlantic voyages at the turn of the century were long, expensive, and perilous. To accomplish it, the family would have needed resources beyond ordinary means. The diary hints at inheritance and heirlooms, movable assets that could have been discreetly sold to fund such an escape. Letters from business associates in Baltimore implied dealings that were at least financially significant, possibly secretive, offering a plausible source of capital. Yet certainty remained elusive. The shipping records offered no definitive proof. Names on passenger lists were altered, and no subsequent documents in Argentina or Brazil could confirm the family's presence. Researchers attempting to trace the Holloways through immigration or land records in South America encountered fragmented archives, unindexed documents, and the impossibility of tracing common surnames after a century. The trail went cold, leaving only speculation about their ultimate destination and fate. Meanwhile, back in North Carolina, the estate remained untouched, the forest steadily reclaiming the cultivated land. The deliberate absence of the family left the property a physical echo of a vanished life. Oral histories from descendants of neighboring families added unsettling color to the narrative. Some recalled witnessing unusual activity in the days preceding the departure. Unknown visitors, carts and horses moving at dusk, and the ominous rise of thick, dark smoke. These details suggested the Holloways' disappearance was coordinated, involving external connections and careful preparation rather than a simple, impulsive flight. Psychological analysis of the diary corroborated this theory of careful planning. Linguistic patterns revealed increasing despair and urgency in the final entries, as if the author were preparing mentally for a permanent rupture. Emotional tension escalated alongside practical concerns, creating a document that was both a personal account and a blueprint of a family in crisis. Isolation, financial uncertainty, and potential social scandal converged, shaping decisions that ultimately removed them from conventional historical records. The South American theory, while compelling, remained controversial. Critics argued that coincidence could explain the passenger names and that no corroborating evidence had surfaced. Yet for many, the possibility of escape offered a human, rational explanation that reconciled the abrupt disappearance with the meticulous preservation of the estate and diary. It transformed the Holloways from passive victims of circumstance into active agents shaping their fate, exercising extraordinary measures to protect themselves and the secrets they carried. Next, we will explore the psychological dimensions of the Holloways' ordeal, including analyses of the diary's language and the mental toll of isolation, providing insight into the family's internal struggles. The Holloway diary is not just a chronicle of events, it is a window into the psyche of a family under extraordinary pressure. In 1996, a graduate student of psychology undertook a clinical examination of the diary, searching for patterns in writing that could reveal the mental and emotional state of its author. What she discovered, painted a portrait of a person simultaneously rational, aware, and deeply burdened by stress, anxiety, and possibly depression. The analysis focused on sentence structure, word choice, and thematic progression. Early entries were meticulous, organized, and reflective, demonstrating a mind accustomed to logic and planning. The author meticulously recorded the comings and goings of neighbors, the condition of the property, and mundane details of daily life. But as the diary progressed toward the final months, a subtle transformation appeared. Sentences grew shorter, fragmented, and sometimes repetitive. Words describing light, hope, and social connection diminished, replaced increasingly by references to darkness, silence, and pressure. It was as if the diary itself tracked a narrowing of perception, a mind closing in on its own despair. The student also noted patterns of dissociation. On several occasions, the author described events from a distance, almost as an observer outside the body. Ordinary occurrences, footsteps in the hall, a sudden knock at the door, unusual noises in the forest, were recounted with clinical detachment. This form of mental self-protection is common among people experiencing trauma, enabling them to survive experiences that might otherwise be overwhelming. These moments of detachment were juxtaposed against sections of startling clarity and analytical precision, where the author carefully weighed options, recorded financial matters, and considered the consequences of potential actions. One passage in particular cited, "Ode out." The author reflected on the obligations of lineage, inheritance, and personal honor, linking these weighty considerations to the growing sense of entrapment. The diary suggests a mind caught between duty and survival, one that was simultaneously rational and terrified, calculating and emotionally frayed. The psychological evidence indicates a sustained effort to maintain control over life, even as external pressures, legal threats, financial instability, and social isolation intensified. Isolation emerges as a central theme. Removed from community oversight and social interaction, the family was vulnerable not only to external threats, but to the psychological toll of confinement. The student argued that the references to mysterious presences and unusual nighttime activity could be interpreted as manifestations of anxiety, guilt, or fear, amplified by solitude. Yet the diary never loses touch with reality completely. Financial records, observations of property, and interactions with neighbors indicate that the author remained grounded, capable of practical action even under emotional duress. The duality of the diary, psychological fragility coupled with methodical planning, makes it extraordinary. It documents not only external events, but the internal struggle of a family navigating complex pressures. Their ultimate decision to abandon their property, perhaps to embark on a transcontinental escape, appears to be the culmination of both rational strategy and psychological necessity. The diary becomes, therefore, a testament not only to history, but to human endurance, offering insight into the ways ordinary people confront extraordinary circumstances. Next, we will examine the legal entanglements and inheritance issues that compounded the Holloways' plight, revealing how societal and bureaucratic pressures may have influenced their final decisions. But the Holloways' story is not solely one of isolation and psychological strain. It is also a tale entangled with legal complications and inheritance disputes that shaped their final choices. In the late 19th century, property rights and family obligations carried enormous social and financial weight, particularly for families like the Holloways, who had experienced prior losses of status and wealth. The diary hints repeatedly at ancestral obligations, inherited property, and unresolved matters in distant Virginia, suggesting a shadow of unfinished business that loomed over the family's lives. One letter, preserved in the archives, revealed that a lawyer in Virginia had reached out regarding a potential inheritance. It described an estate in need of legal claimants and emphasized that in-person presence was necessary to secure the property. While this could have represented an opportunity for financial recovery, it simultaneously posed a profound risk. Traveling to Virginia might expose the Holloways to public scrutiny, legal complications, and possible investigations that the patriarch was desperate to avoid. Researchers speculate that fear of exposure may have outweighed the allure of the inheritance, particularly if the family had reasons, documented or otherwise, to remain under the radar. Tax and property records from North Carolina offer further clues. Until 1899, the Holloways consistently paid taxes, maintaining their estate as a functioning farm. Yet in 1900, all payments ceased. County records indicate that officials attempted to contact heirs, but no one appeared. The land eventually reverted to the state, signaling a definitive break from the property and its responsibilities. The diary's final entries align perfectly with this timing, suggesting that the family had made a deliberate decision to leave everything behind. Such a choice implies careful planning. G. Balancing both psychological necessity and legal consequences. The inheritance issue also intersects with family dynamics. The patriarch's references to obligations were not merely financial, they conveyed a moral and cultural duty, a weight of lineage that could not easily be ignored. The pressure to preserve family honor, meet expectations, and manage inherited responsibilities would have amplified the already intense stress of isolation and social avoidance. In practical terms, these obligations may have driven some decisions that appear mysterious to outsiders: abrupt departure, secrecy, and the abandonment of possessions. Historians reviewing the case argue that these legal and financial pressures were compounded by the era's bureaucratic rigidity. 19th century record-keeping was slow and fragmented, claiming inheritance required not only travel, but careful navigation of complex legal protocols. Any misstep could jeopardize property rights permanently. For a family already under strain, these challenges could have seemed insurmountable, further motivating an escape rather than confrontation. Yet the inheritance question leaves an enduring mystery. Why did the Holloways apparently abandon the opportunity entirely? If they possessed the resources to relocate and start anew, why risk everything abroad rather than resolve legal matters at home? The answer may lie in a combination of fear, pride, and practical limitation. Perhaps the patriarch feared exposure from past mistakes, rumors of duels or business complications, while simultaneously seeking a final measure of autonomy. The inheritance, rather than being a lifeline, could have represented another chain tying them to a world they no longer wished to face. Next, we will delve into the subtle traces of departure, from abandoned furniture to the mysterious setting of the dining table, which suggest a sudden, deliberate exit that has puzzled researchers for over a century. While legal documents and inheritance issues illuminate one layer of the Holloways' story, the physical traces left behind at their North Carolina estate hint at something far more immediate: a sudden, deliberate departure that has mystified historians for generations. When authorities and neighbors finally visited the property in 1900, they found the household almost frozen in time. Furniture remained arranged as though waiting for daily use. Beds were made, personal belongings were in place, and most strikingly, the kitchen table was set for a meal that was never served. Plates gleamed under dim sunlight, silverware was meticulously organized, and a tablecloth lay perfectly flat, suggesting someone had recently cared for it. These small but precise details reveal a startling tension between order and absence. The Holloways did not simply vanish in chaos. Their exit was intentional, planned with attention to appearances. Whether they intended to create an illusion of normalcy for any observers or simply moved with efficiency, the effect is uncanny. Historians examining the site have noted that such preparation indicates mental clarity and decisiveness, even amid the strain described in the diary. A family under duress, contemplating a long-term flight, would need to manage not only their own departure, but also the impression left behind, and the Holloways appear to have done so with meticulous care. Equally puzzling was the handling of possessions. Valuables were either left behind or subtly removed in ways that left no trace. If they were fleeing debt or legal scrutiny, taking resources would seem logical. Yet much remained in situ, from household furniture to minor personal effects. Some scholars suggest this could reflect a desire to vanish cleanly, leaving no claims or disputes for those left behind. Others argue it could indicate urgency, a sudden threat, or realization that immediate departure was necessary, overriding practical concerns about transporting property. The diary provides indirect corroboration. Entries in the weeks leading up to the departure describe increasing tension, unexplained noises, and a persistent sense of being observed. The patriarch's language shifts from analytical reflection to terse, urgent notes, hinting at both fear and resolve. While psychological interpretation can never be conclusive, the alignment between diary tone and physical evidence at the estate is compelling. Together they portray a family moving swiftly, deliberately, and with extraordinary care to orchestrate the conditions of their exit. Local oral histories add yet another dimension. Neighbors recalled unusual activity in the final days, people coming and going at dusk, carts arriving and horses prepared for transport. Smoke was observed on the night of departure, not from domestic fires, but from something darker, heavier, as though materials were being intentionally destroyed. Whether documents, tools, or other items were burned remains unknown. The accounts suggest a family not merely leaving, but actively erasing elements of their existence, a deliberate severance from both community and past. What emerges is a portrait of strategic departure, psychologically aware, legally informed, and socially calculated. The Holloways' final preparations reveal foresight, fear, and an unyielding determination to control their narrative, even if that meant disappearing entirely. Next, we will examine the journey itself, or the possibilities of one, as traces suggest the Holloways may have relocated far from North Carolina, perhaps even to South America, leaving only speculation and fragments behind. The mystery of the Holloways' disappearance does not end at their meticulously abandoned estate. If their preparations were as deliberate as evidence suggests, the next logical question arises: where did they go? Historians and genealogists have long speculated that the family may have left North Carolina to start anew elsewhere, with the tantalizing possibility of a South American escape emerging as one of the most compelling theories. In 2019, a comprehensive study uncovered a ship's manifest from April 1900, listing passengers whose ages and slightly altered surnames loosely corresponded with members of the Holloway family. While circumstantial, the timing, mere weeks after their last diary entries, sparked significant interest. The manifest indicated travel to ports in Brazil and Argentina, suggesting a journey of considerable length and complexity. For a family ostensibly under financial pressure, such a voyage would require careful planning, resources, and resolve. The logistics alone were extraordinary. Transatlantic travel at the turn of the century was perilous, expensive, and time-consuming. Passage involved weeks at sea in cramped conditions, reliance on the cooperation of shipping lines, and navigating foreign customs. Any attempt to leave under assumed names would have demanded meticulous preparation and significant financial assets, possibly secreted from prior business dealings in Baltimore or covert sales of inherited property. This theory aligns with hints in the diary about ancestral obligations and hidden resources, suggesting that the family may have carefully orchestrated both departure and survival strategy. Critics, however, urge caution. Name similarities on a passenger list are hardly conclusive proof. Thousands of travelers migrated to South America during this period, many coincidentally sharing common or anglicized surnames. Documentary. Evidence linking these passengers definitively to the Holloways remains elusive, with local archives in Brazil and Argentina offering fragmented records. Attempts to trace property ownership, marriages, or deaths of possible family members have met only dead ends, leaving researchers with tantalizing possibilities but no certainties. Despite the gaps, the South American theory offers a rational explanation for why the family was never found within the United States. It accounts for their abrupt departure, abandonment of possessions, and the finality described in the diary. In this scenario, the Holloways were not victims of misfortune, crime, or the supernatural. They were architects of their own fate, determined to escape scrutiny and begin life anew on a continent far removed from both creditors and social obligations. Oral histories from neighbors lend subtle support. Witnesses remembered increased activity at dusk, carts loaded with supplies, and smoke rising from the estate on the final night. These details could indicate preparations for travel, destruction of sensitive documents, or both. The juxtaposition of methodical preparation and the unknown destination reinforces the narrative of a family simultaneously meticulous and daring. Ultimately, the journey beyond North Carolina remains shrouded in speculation. Whether the Holloways reached South America and integrated under new identities or met unforeseen obstacles en route is impossible to confirm. The combination of documentary hints, physical evidence, and oral accounts creates a compelling but unresolved chapter of their story, one that bridges the calculated departure with the ultimate unknown. Next, we will explore the psychological dimensions of the Holloways' flight, examining how stress, isolation, and fear shaped the family's decisions and the diary's haunting narrative. Beyond logistics and possible destinations, The Holloway story is equally a tale of human psychology under extraordinary pressure. The diary, in its meticulous yet haunting prose, provides an unparalleled window into the minds of individuals confronting isolation, fear, and uncertainty. It is one thing to speculate about physical disappearance, but understanding the mental and emotional landscape that led to it offers a deeper layer of the mystery. Analysis by a psychology graduate student in 1996 revealed linguistic patterns that hint at prolonged stress, depression, and perhaps even trauma. Words denoting darkness, weight, and obligation increase steadily throughout the diary, while terms reflecting hope or possibility diminish. This progression paints a chilling portrait of a family gradually consumed by circumstances they could neither control nor escape. Passages oscillate between detached observation and intimate reflection, suggesting a coping mechanism: dissociation. By viewing events as an outsider might, the diary's author created mental distance from reality, a strategy often employed by those under extreme pressure. Yet this detachment is intertwined with extraordinary clarity. Analytical passages demonstrate logical reasoning and meticulous observation, reflecting a mind striving for control amid growing chaos. Every account of daily chores, visitors, or unexplained nocturnal phenomena is recorded with a balance of precision and emotional honesty. This duality, the simultaneous unraveling and focus, gives the diary its enduring power. It is neither pure fantasy nor unfiltered delusion. It is a sophisticated attempt to document reality while navigating internal turmoil. Isolation amplifies stress in ways that few historical records capture. The Holloways lived in a remote part of North Carolina, their social ties limited, their exposure to the outside all sparse. Isolation heightens perception, warps time, and intensifies fears, whether rational or imagined. References to mysterious lights, rhythmic sounds, or inexplicable presences could be manifestations of heightened awareness, anxiety, or collective stress. Even mundane events might have been imbued with ominous significance, reflecting the psychological strain of solitude. The diary also conveys the weight of legacy and responsibility. Mentions of inherited property, ancestral obligations, and moral debt suggest that the family perceived themselves as custodians of more than land. They were bound to an intergenerational code that shaped choices and magnified stress. The threat of exposure, legal challenges, or social judgment may have felt insurmountable, justifying drastic measures like abandoning the estate entirely. Viewed through this lens, the Holloway's disappearance becomes a story of mental survival. The act of leaving everything behind, house, possessions, even evidence, can be interpreted as a desperate yet calculated step to preserve both physical safety and psychological sanity. Escape, whether to another state, continent, or identity, was not merely a flight from creditors or legal trouble. It was an attempt to reclaim agency in a life dominated by pressures beyond their control. Next, we will examine the estate itself and the physical traces left behind, exploring how the landscape, architecture, and remnants of daily life intersected with the psychological world of the Holloways. And the Holloways' mental struggles were inseparable from the physical space they inhabited. Their estate, nestled deep in the North Carolina mountains, was both a sanctuary and a prison. Letters, diary entries, and oral histories all paint a picture of a home meticulously maintained yet eerily isolated, a space where the boundaries between ordinary domestic life and the extraordinary tension of secrecy blurred. Historical records indicate that the property included a substantial house, several outbuildings, cultivated fields, and a forested perimeter that stretched for acres. The main house, described in contemporary reports, was functional yet imposing, with multiple rooms, a central hall, and a kitchen that appeared the heart of the home. The diary repeatedly mentions daily routines, household chores, and interactions within the family, underscoring how deeply their lives were tied to the rhythm of the estate. Even small details, clean dishes, a laid table, or organized silverware, suggest a careful maintenance of normalcy despite growing stress. When researchers and later students visited the site in the 2010s, they found little of the original structures intact. Time, vegetation, and decay had reclaimed almost every trace. Moss-covered stones hinted at the foundations of the main house. Fragments of farm tools and rusted nails marked the locations of barns and outbuildings. One of the most compelling discoveries was the well, described extensively in the diary. Hidden beneath thick undergrowth, it was deep, circular, and built with carefully arranged stonework. Its existence confirmed that the diary's author had not fabricated details for dramatic effect. The estate's physical reality mirrored the written account with remarkable precision. The estate's isolation played a pivotal role in both daily life and the eventual disappearance. Travel to nearby towns was arduous, and social interactions were minimal. Neighbors recall the Holloways as polite but distant, keeping their affairs private. The remoteness provided safety, anonymity, and control over the family's environment, but it also amplified anxiety. Any unexplained noise, visitor, or event could take on heightened significance when filtered through the lens of solitude. Curiously, reports from the time note unusual activity shortly before the family vanished. People arriving and departing at dusk, carts and horses moving across the property, and the appearance of smoke from the estate, all suggest preparation for departure. Yet the suddenness of their disappearance, leaving furniture, clothing, and other possessions behind, adds to the mystery. The estate itself seems to tell a story of careful planning, deliberate concealment, and a desire to leave without explanation, reinforcing the notion that the Holloways were taking control over their narrative, even in absence. The landscape, too, shaped the family's experience. Dense forests surrounded the property, limiting visibility and access while offering concealment. Seasonal changes, weather patterns, and local wildlife would have influenced daily life and heightened the sense of isolation described in the diary. The physical terrain mirrored the emotional terrain, dense, challenging, and difficult to navigate, but also protective and impenetrable for outsiders. The estate, in essence, was a character in the Holloways' story. Its walls, grounds, and hidden well bore witness to their struggles, fears, and final decisions. It was a place of daily life intertwined with suspense, a backdrop for both ordinary existence and extraordinary choices. Understanding the estate is crucial for grasping why the Holloways made the decisions they did, and why the mystery surrounding their disappearance continues to fascinate. Next we'll delve into the letters, documents, and external communications that hint at business dealings, legal matters, and the complex networks influencing the family's fate. The Holloways were not entirely cut off from the world, despite the remote seclusion of their estate. Hidden among dusty archives and rediscovered decades later were letters and documents that offer glimpses into a broader life, one that extended far beyond the North Carolina mountains. These pieces of correspondence reveal the family's entanglements in legal, financial, and social matters that were likely sources of stress and secrecy. Some letters, dated from the late 1890s, referenced Baltimore business dealings. The patriarch appeared to be engaged in investments in railroad ventures and the lumber trade, yet researchers struggled to definitively connect his name to surviving records. The possibility existed that he used aliases or alternate spellings, common practice at the time to separate private affairs from business. Regardless, the documents make clear that the Holloways were not simple, isolated farmers. They were individuals with prior commitments, obligations, and perhaps secrets that could have put them at risk if exposed. Other letters hinted at legal complications, particularly concerning inheritance. One letter from a lawyer in Virginia explained that the family could claim property only by appearing in person, a potentially costly and dangerous proposition if the patriarch wished to avoid public scrutiny. The diary itself references anticipation of these letters, suggesting the family's awareness of entanglements they could neither ignore nor easily resolve. Why these letters remained unopened for years remains a mystery. Had the family left before receiving them, or had they deliberately avoided opening them, aware of the contents? The intent behind their preservation without response adds an unsettling layer of ambiguity. There were also personal communications. A letter from Charleston, sent by a former acquaintance of the Holloway matriarch, Sugade, suggested social networks that reached beyond the mountains. These letters indicate that the family maintained contact with extended circles, friends, distant relatives, or business associates, even while appearing detached from their immediate community. Their seclusion was selective, strategic, and perhaps protective, shielding the family from scrutiny while allowing controlled interactions. By the 1990s, genealogists and historians began to digitize these letters, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. The correspondence confirmed aspects of the diary, particularly references to financial concerns and impending decisions. The timing of some letters, coinciding with the family's final months on the estate, suggested mounting pressures that may have precipitated their disappearance. What is striking is the dual nature of these communications. They demonstrate both connection and isolation. The Holloways were part of a wider network, yet deliberately distanced themselves. Each unopened letter, each ambiguous document, becomes a symbol of the tension between engagement with the outside world and the desire for complete control over their environment. These letters are not just mundane records. They are markers of anxiety, strategy, and decision-making that shaped the family's final actions. Through this lens, the Holloways' disappearance begins to make sense as a calculated retreat. The estate's seclusion, combined with unanswered correspondence and selective interactions, paints a portrait of a family navigating mounting pressures while seeking a way to escape, preserve autonomy, and protect themselves from exposure. The letters, once overlooked, now act as keys, offering insight into the forces driving one of history's most enduring mysteries. Next, we will explore the diary's psychological landscape, where language, patterns, and emotional markers reveal the fragile and tormented minds of those who lived within the Holloway estate. And the Holloway Diary is more than a chronicle of events. It is a window into the mind of someone grappling with immense pressure, isolation, and the weight of secrets that could not be shared. For decades, historians debated whether the diary reflected supernatural experiences, criminal entanglements, or simply the stress of rural life. Modern analysis, however, has allowed scholars to approach it from a psychological perspective, revealing a complex and tormented consciousness. Linguists and psychologists examining the diary noted a striking pattern. Words related to darkness, silence, and heaviness increased steadily, while terms associated with hope, possibility, and community diminished. This was not mere stylistic choice. It mirrored a narrowing perception, a mind slowly constricted by fear, stress, and obligation. The author alternated between detached, impersonal observation and moments of intense emotional involvement. Such oscillations are consistent with dissociation, a coping mechanism employed during prolonged trauma or anxiety, where the mind separates itself from the immediacy of painful experiences to survive them. The diary's entries also suggest a remarkable awareness of mental decline. The author documents fears, mysterious occurrences, and escalating tension, but does so with analytical precision. Sentences are structured carefully, observations are measured. These are not the ramblings of someone wholly consumed by fear, but the reflections of a sophisticated mind struggling to retain clarity under oppressive conditions. It is this duality, simultaneously vulnerable and disciplined, that gives the diary its haunting resonance. Analysis further revealed potential stresses, legal obligations, family inheritance disputes, and ambiguous references to external pressures. The recurring mentions of nocturnal sounds, unexplained movements, and unsettling PTs. Recencies can be interpreted in multiple ways. They may have been external phenomena, literal events witnessed by the family. Alternatively, they could represent projections of inner turmoil, anxiety, paranoia, or depression given tangible form in the diary's narrative. Isolation, a recurring theme, magnifies both possibilities. Cut off from neighbors and community, the family may have been acutely sensitive to every creak, shadow, or distant sound. Importantly, the diary also reflects moral and emotional conflict. References to obligations, debts, both financial and ancestral, reveal a family striving to balance duty with self-preservation. The narrative hints at a growing recognition that their situation is unsustainable, that the pressures surrounding them are reaching a tipping point. There is anticipation, even dread, in the final entries. The sense that a decisive action, irreversible and definitive, is imminent. In short, the Holloway Diary is as much a study of human psychology as it is a historical document. It demonstrates how prolonged isolation, compounded by financial, social, and moral pressures, can erode perception and shape behavior. It is a testament to resilience, fear, and the mind's capacity to create both clarity and distortion under duress. Next, we will examine the final preparations and abandonment of the Holloway estate, where the diary, letters, and external evidence converge to reveal the family's last decisions and the enigma that followed. As the Holloway diary unfolds into its final chapters, the details of the family's last days on their North Carolina estate grow increasingly vivid and unsettling. Unlike previous entries that focused on daily routines or distant anxieties, the final passages hint at deliberate action, a sense that every movement, every arrangement, carried purpose. It is here that the diary, combined with letters and oral histories, begins to suggest the contours of the family's mysterious departure. Contemporary accounts and later genealogical research reveal that, in the weeks leading up to their disappearance in the spring of 1900, there was unusual activity on the Holloway property. Neighbors, though distant from the family, noticed carts arriving at dusk, unfamiliar faces moving quietly across the land, and a flurry of work around the house. According to oral histories preserved by neighboring families, there were rhythmic sounds, low murmurs, and lights that pulsed irregularly, too precise and too deliberate to be ordinary domestic activity. These anecdotes, while unverifiable, align with the diary's mention of preparations and the growing sense of finality. Inside the house, the diary describes careful organization. Furniture remained in place, personal belongings were left untouched, and even the kitchen table appeared set as if a meal was about to be served. Clean dishes, neatly arranged silverware, and a freshly laid tablecloth suggest the departure was abrupt, yet methodical. It was as if the family intended to create the illusion that life had continued normally even as they were leaving. Scholars have debated whether this reflects panic, a strategic decision to avoid scrutiny, or ritualistic intent, but the effect is undeniably eerie. Financial and legal pressures may have dictated aspects of this preparation. Letters indicate the Holloways were aware of property disputes, pending inheritance matters, and potential exposure of past associations. Leaving abruptly while retaining control over secrets may have been a pragmatic necessity, especially if any external scrutiny could trigger investigations or revive legal obligations. Simultaneously, it is plausible that the family sought to protect themselves emotionally and socially, retreating from a world they could no longer safely navigate. One particularly compelling detail comes from the diary's references to storage and concealment. The family appears to have removed certain valuables, possibly heirlooms or documents, while leaving others in place. This selective preservation indicates forethought and knowledge that the estate might be examined in their absence. Coupled with evidence that some members may have traveled under altered names, suggested by passenger manifests of ships departing for South America, it paints a picture of a planned and coordinated escape rather than a sudden flight. Yet for all the preparation, there is an unmistakable note of tension in the diary. Entries suggest anxiety, fear of exposure, and an awareness that the decision to leave would mark the end of a life built painstakingly in secrecy. The psychological weight of departure, leaving a home, possessions, and community behind, resonates throughout these pages, giving insight into the human cost of the mystery. The Holloways were not merely disappearing, they were closing a chapter with a finality that remains haunting over a century later. Next, we will explore the aftermath of the Holloway departure, examining the estate's abandonment, tax records, and the first traces left behind that fueled speculation and legend for generations. What with the Holloways' sudden departure complete, the estate they had meticulously maintained for decades became a silent witness to an unresolved mystery. By the spring of 1900, tax records confirmed that the property was abandoned, no payments were made, and county officials were unable to locate any heirs or guardians. It was as though the family had vanished into thin air, leaving behind furniture, clothing, and personal items untouched, while the house itself appeared frozen in the midst of daily life. The sudden absence intensified the eerie aura surrounding the Holloway estate. Investigators of the time were left with an unsettling tableau. A well-kept property, the kitchen table laid, and signs of life abruptly halted. Administrative records note that searches for the family proved fruitless, and after months of inactivity, the land reverted to the county due to unpaid taxes. The precision of this disappearance is striking. The diary's final entry aligns almost perfectly with the first official acknowledgement of the property's abandonment. There is no ambiguity in timing. The Holloway's departure was not gradual, nor the result of a slow drift. It was instantaneous, deliberate, and meticulously timed. Neighbors, too, were left in a state of confusion and superstition. Oral histories passed down through local families describe unusual activity in the days leading up to the disappearance, mysterious visitors, nocturnal lights, and the sense that preparations were underway for an event no one could name. Following the family's vanishing, the estate fell silent, a physical and psychological void that seemed to absorb curiosity and attention. Those who lived nearby reported a strange reticence to enter or examine the property, almost as if instinctively aware that the Holloway's secrets demanded respect. The estate itself quickly became a focal point for speculation. Amateur genealogists and later historians have noted that while the structural aspects of the house remained intact for years, the natural environment began reclaiming the property. Moss-covered foundations, trees sprouted where fields once existed, and the well, mentioned repeatedly in the diary, became obscured beneath undergrowth. Despite its decay, the land preserved the memory of the family's existence with an almost sacred stillness, a monument to lives lived in secrecy and ended abruptly. Financial and legal complications added another layer to the story. Any remaining belongings and documents left behind were left to deteriorate, while disputes over inheritance remained unresolved. The decision to abandon the estate rather than sell or transfer it raises questions about the family's priorities. Was it fear of exposure, a desire to escape obligations, or an expression of psychological strain that drove them to leave so completely? The truth remains uncertain, but the evidence of their absence, legal, physical, and anecdotal, cements the Holloways as a historical enigma. This silence, paradoxically, became one of the most enduring features of the story. It is the absence, not the presence, that defines the Holloway estate in history. Researchers returning decades later found obstacles at every turn: overgrown paths, fragmented records, and an almost tactile sense that the property resisted discovery. The estate's abandonment is both literal and symbolic, a space that holds questions rather than answers, a site that preserves mystery rather than clarity. Next, we will examine early 20th century efforts to trace the Holloways, including travel records, ship manifests, and the first tentative links suggesting a life begun anew on distant shores. For as the 20th century progressed, the Holloways' sudden disappearance continued to intrigue historians, genealogists, and curious locals alike. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the advent of digitized records and online databases allowed researchers to investigate possibilities previously inaccessible. One of the most compelling theories arose from a combination of passenger manifests, immigration logs, and historical correspondence. Could the Holloways have simply fled, leaving North Carolina forever, to begin a new life abroad? In 2019, a comprehensive investigation brought this theory into sharper focus. Ship manifests from the port of Baltimore in April 1900 were examined closely, revealing a list of passengers whose names bore striking resemblance to the Holloway family. The ages and number of individuals corresponded roughly to the family's composition, though surnames had been altered slightly. While coincidence cannot be dismissed entirely, thousands of people traveled across the Atlantic at the time. The timing was provocative. The departure matched almost exactly with the diary's final entries and the property's abandonment. It suggested not supernatural intervention or tragedy, but a carefully planned escape. Yet questions remained. Why would a family with modest financial means undertake such a daring journey to South America? Travel in 1900 was neither cheap nor easy. Boarding a ship, crossing oceans, and starting a life in unfamiliar lands required resources and foresight. Some historians propose that the Holloways might have quietly liquidated assets before leaving: heirlooms, property documents, or investments previously hidden from public view. Letters hinting at a Baltimore business partner could suggest hidden funds or discreet financial arrangements, allowing them to execute the escape without drawing attention. Explorations of records in Argentina, and Brazil, the presumed destinations, yielded tantalizing but inconclusive results. Some surnames resembling Holley appeared in immigration registries, but linking these definitively to the North Carolina family proved impossible. Country's historical record-keeping was fragmented, and over a century had passed. Nevertheless, the possibility of a South American settlement, though speculative, offered a logical explanation for why the Holloways vanished so completely from U.S. records. Psychological analysis adds another layer of understanding to this theory. The diary reflects mounting anxiety, fear of exposure, and the oppressive weight of obligations. Fleeing the country could represent not just physical escape, but a mental necessity, removing themselves from creditors, authorities, and a community that might have probed too deeply into their past. In essence, a journey across oceans could be interpreted as the ultimate act of self-preservation, an attempt to claim autonomy in a world that seemed increasingly hostile. Even if the South American theory holds merit, ambiguity remains. Did they travel as intended? Did they survive the journey? Or is it possible that, like so many emigrants of the era, they faced misfortune en route? Shipwrecks, illness, and accidents were common, and no follow-up records confirm a safe arrival. The Holloway's fate, while plausibly extended to distant lands, still refuses to provide closure. This theory reshapes the narrative from supernatural speculation to a deeply human story of courage, desperation, and planning. The family did not vanish by chance. They may have orchestrated their disappearance, using every resource and tactic at their disposal to vanish from a world they could no longer navigate safely. Next, we will explore the psychological and social interpretations of the Holloway Diary, revealing how isolation, trauma, and familial pressures shaped the family's final decisions and influenced generations of readers. Over a century has passed since the Holloways vanished from the North Carolina mountains, yet the echoes of their lives continue to ripple through history. The diary, abandoned estate, and fragmentary records provide a rare window into a family caught between societal expectations, personal trauma, and the urgent desire to escape. By now, we understand that the story is more than a mystery. It is a human saga of desperation, ingenuity, and unresolved questions. Even after decades of research, historians, genealogists, and amateur investigators remain divided. Some accept the theory that the Holloways fled to South America, blending into anonymity and leaving no trace. Others emphasize psychological pressures, interpreting the diary as a meticulous record of isolation, stress, and deteriorating mental health. Every interpretation, whether practical or speculative, underscores one truth. The Holloways were navigating forces far larger than themselves: social norms, legal pressures, and personal secrets, forces that eventually forced their final, irrevocable choice. Visiting the property today, one sees little of what once existed. Nature has reclaimed the land. Moss-covered stones hint at foundations, a hidden well marks a point of continuity, and the wind whispers through trees that once shaded a family of profound complexity. The absence of human presence is almost ceremonial, as if the mountains themselves guard the memory of those who lived and suffered here. The Holloways' disappearance created a space where imagination and history intersect. Scholars analyze handwriting patterns, linguists study word frequency, and psychologists debate mental states, but the estate itself offers no answers, only context and atmosphere. The diary, preserved in the archives of the North Carolina Historical Society, continues to attract new generations of readers. Digital access allows scholars worldwide to study its pages, while forums, blogs, and podcasts allow enthusiasts to debate theories, examine details, and even propose new hypotheses. Every reader, consciously or not, becomes part of the Holloway's story, interpreting motivations, imagining fears, and confronting the limitations of human knowledge. The mystery endures precisely because it cannot be fully solved. Beyond historical analysis, the Holloway case reminds us of universal human dilemmas. How do we confront secrets from the past? How far will we go to protect those we love? What happens when isolation stretches too long, when pressure mounts beyond endurance, and when escape becomes the only viable solution? The diary allows us to witness these struggles firsthand, transcending time, and offering empathy across generations. Perhaps most striking is the duality of the Holloway story. It is at once ordinary and extraordinary. It is ordinary because it reflects experiences many can relate to: fear, family tension, societal pressures, and the desire for a fresh start. Yet it is extraordinary because of the gaps, coincidences, and unanswered questions that elevate it from a personal history to a narrative of legend. The interplay between fact and interpretation keeps the story alive, demanding exploration, reflection, and imagination. As the sun sets over the North Carolina mountains, one can almost envision the Holloways walking the forested paths they once knew, their voices carried away by time, leaving only footprints in the soil, marks in the diary, and an enduring puzzle for history. Their lives, their choices, and their ultimate disappearance continue to captivate and unsettle, reminding us that some stories resist finality and some mysteries are meant to endure. If you found yourself immersed in their story, reflect on the human emotions that drove their choices, the pressures that shaped their world, and the questions that remain unanswered. The Holloways may have disappeared, but their legacy of courage, secrecy, and survival remains etched in history.